The moment I woke up, I knew something was wrong. Not because of the sharp antiseptic smell or the dull ache behind my eyes, but because my phone was gone. I always keep it under my pillow. Always. But that morning, at 72 years old, lying in a hospital bed in a paper-thin gown, my lifeline had vanished, and my own son was the one who took it. I turned my head slowly and saw Gideon standing by the window, whispering to Celeste. They stopped the second they noticed I was awake. Too fast? Too rehearsed? "Mom, hey, you're finally up," Gideon said, walking over with that careful voice people use when they're pretending everything is fine. "My phone," I said. My throat was dry, but my mind wasn't. "Where is it?" Celeste smiled. Not warm. Controlled. "Oh, Marlo, you don't need that right now. You need to rest. The doctor said no stress." I held her gaze longer than she expected. "Give it back." Gideon stepped in, soft but firm. "We're just trying to help you. You had an episode." "You were confused." Confused. That word landed wrong, heavy, placed, not spoken. "I remember everything," I said quietly. "So I'll ask again. Where is my phone?" Neither of them answered. Instead, Celeste picked up a clipboard from the tray beside me and flipped it open like we were moving on. "Let's focus on getting you discharged properly. There are just a few forms. Standard things." She slid the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. I looked at Gideon instead. Really looked at him. The way his fingers kept tapping against his arm. The way he wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. The way he kept glancing at the door, like he was waiting for someone, or something, to happen before I did. That's when I heard it. Not clearly. Just enough. "Before she calls anyone," it came from the hallway. Celeste's voice. Lower than before. And then Gideon, sharper this time. "That's why I took it." Something inside me went completely still. They weren't worried about me. They were managing me. I leaned back into the pillow, slower now, quieter. Let them think I was weak. Let them think the fog was still there. Because if my own son had taken my phone so I couldn't call anyone, then whatever they were planning had already started. And I was already late. "Hello, my dears. Right away, this feels wrong. When family takes control instead of offering help, something deeper is always hiding. Would you trust them at this point?" I didn't reach for the papers, not yet. Instead, I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the hospital blanket, tracing the thin stitching like I didn't have the strength to do anything else. Gideon relaxed first. That was his mistake. He always needed visible control to feel safe, and the second he thought he had it, he stopped watching closely. Celeste, on the other hand, stayed sharp. "These are time-sensitive," she said, tapping the top page with a manicured nail. "We've already coordinated with a private recovery center. It's quiet, very comfortable. They specialize in cases like yours." "Cases like mine," I repeated, almost absent-mindedly. "Post-episode cognitive instability," she replied smoothly, as if she'd rehearsed that phrase in front of a mirror. "Temporary, of course, but it's better if professionals monitor you." I finally looked down at the papers. The first page was exactly what she wanted me to see. Hospital discharge instructions, medication schedules, follow-up appointments. Clean, ordinary, harmless. The second page was not. I didn't move my face, didn't change my breathing, but I read every word. Transfer authorization, long-term residential care, financial responsibility assigned to existing assets. Existing assets. My assets. I turned the page slowly, as if I were struggling to focus. The third page was worse. Legal phrasing buried under soft language, temporary guardianship clauses, limited decision-making authority for patient safety. Patient, not Marlowe, not mother. Patient. "You've been busy," I said quietly. Gideon shifted. "We're just trying to make sure everything is handled so you don't have to worry about anything." "That's kind of you," I replied, still reading. "And when exactly did I agree to leave my home?" Celeste didn't hesitate. "You didn't. Not yet. That's why we need your signature." There it was. Clean, direct, not a misunderstanding, not panic, not love, a transaction. I let out a slow breath and leaned back again, closing my eyes for just a second. Not from weakness, from calculation. "Water," I murmured. Gideon moved immediately, grateful for something simple to do. He poured from the plastic pitcher into a small cup and handed it to me like he was helping a fragile thing. I took a sip. Just enough. When I opened my eyes again, I didn't look at the papers. I looked at Celeste. "And my house?" I asked softly. "What happens to it while I'm being monitored?" For the first time, she paused. Just half a second. Too long. "We'll take care of it," she said. "Of course you will." "Of course you will," I echoed. Silence settled in the room, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things they hadn't said yet, full of decisions already made without me. Then Celeste made a mistake. A small one. The kind most people wouldn't notice. "We just don't want delays," she added lightly. "The photographer is already scheduled, and the market—" She stopped, but I didn't. "The photographer?" I asked. Gideon shot her a look. Sharp, angry, immediate. Celeste recovered fast, but not fast enough. "For insurance documentation," she said. "Standard procedure." I nodded slowly, like I believed her. But inside, everything locked into place. They weren't preparing for my recovery. They were preparing for my absence. And if I signed those papers, I wouldn't just lose my phone. I would lose my house, my money, and every decision I had left. So I did the only thing they weren't expecting. I let my hand tremble slightly and pushed the papers a few inches away. "Later," I whispered. "I'm too tired." Gideon exhaled. Relief. Celeste hesitated, then smiled again. "Of course," she said. But I had already seen enough. They thought I was slowing down. They didn't realize I had just started thinking faster than both of them combined. I kept my eyes half closed long enough for them to believe I was drifting. Gideon lowered his voice again. Celeste stepped closer to him, heels barely making a sound against the polished floor. But I could hear enough. I always could. People think age dulls you. It doesn't. It just teaches you which sounds matter. "We can't drag this out," Celeste whispered. "If she talks to anyone—" "She won't," Gideon cut in. "She can barely keep her eyes open." I almost smiled. Almost. "She was asking about the house," Celeste pressed. "That wasn't random." A pause. Then Gideon, quieter now. Then we moved faster. There it was again. Not concern, not hesitation. Speed. They were racing something. Or someone. I shifted slightly in the bed, just enough to make the blanket rustle. Both of them went silent instantly. When I opened my eyes, they were already looking at me, expressions reset, like actors hitting their marks. "You should sleep," Gideon said. "I will," I answered softly. "But I don't like being talked over." That landed. Not hard, but precisely. Celeste stepped in with that same polished tone. "No one is talking over you, Marlowe. We're just trying to make things easier." "For who?" I asked. Neither of them answered. Good. I let my gaze drift again, slower this time, like I didn't have the strength to hold it steady. But inside, everything was sharpening. Every word, every slip, every glance between them, it all stacked neatly in my mind. I needed more, not proof. I already had that. I needed timing. How long? I murmured. Until this center is ready for me? Celeste answered too quickly. They have availability immediately. Of course they did. And my things? I asked. Clothes? Personal items? Gideon stepped in this time. We'll take care of all of that. You won't need to worry about packing. Packing? Such a small word for erasing someone's life? I turned my head slightly toward the window. The light outside had shifted. Late morning, maybe closer to noon. Time was moving, faster than they wanted me to realize. Did anyone come by? I asked. From the church? No, Celeste said immediately. We told them you needed privacy. I see. Of course you did. You closed every door before I even knew I was inside a room. There was a soft knock, and the door opened just enough for a nurse to step in. Not the same one from earlier. This one was younger, brisk, focused. She checked the monitor, adjusted something near my IV, and gave me a quick, professional smile. Vitals are stable, she said. That's good. I watched her carefully. She didn't linger, didn't question, didn't look at Gideon or Celeste for permission. That told me something too. She wasn't involved. But she also wasn't paying attention. Not yet. When she left, the room felt smaller again. Gideon checked his watch. Celeste picked up the clipboard once more, flipping through the pages like she was building momentum. We really should try to get at least some of this signed today, she said. Delays could complicate your transfer. Transfer, not discharge. Transfer. Words matter. And they were choosing theirs very carefully. I let my fingers move again, slow and unsteady, until they rested lightly on the edge of the top page. Gideon leaned forward slightly, watching, waiting. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I traced one line with my fingertip. Financial responsibility assigned to existing assets. I looked up at him. Gideon, I said quietly, how much do you think I don't understand? He froze. Not long, just enough. Then he smiled again. That same controlled, careful smile. Mom, you're overthinking this. No. I was finally seeing it clearly. And the clearer it became, the colder I felt. Because this wasn't just about moving me somewhere safe. This was about removing me. Efficiently. Quietly. Legally enough to look clean. And if they succeeded, no one would question it. An elderly woman. A sudden episode. A concerned family stepping in. It would all make sense. Except for one thing. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. And I wasn't signing a single piece of paper they put in front of me. I let my hand slip off the page like it had lost strength and closed my eyes again. But this time, I wasn't pretending to rest. I was planning exactly how I was going to break their timeline before they could finish building it. I didn't rush. That was the first thing I told myself once the room went quiet again. Panic is loud. Panic makes mistakes. And right now, the only advantage I had left was that they still believed I didn't understand the shape of what they were doing. So I stayed still, listened, waited. Gideon stepped out first. Said something about making a call. Celeste stayed behind, but not for long. She hovered for a minute, pretending to reorganize the papers, straightening edges that didn't need straightening, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds, checking, measuring. Then finally, she leaned closer. Try to get some rest, Marlowe. she said softly. Things will feel clearer soon. Clearer. I almost laughed. The second the door clicked shut behind her, I opened my eyes. The silence felt different now. Not empty. Unprotected. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway. No shadows under the door. No voices close enough to catch. Good. I pushed myself up, inch by inch, ignoring the pull in my arm where the IV line tugged slightly. My body wasn't at full strength, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to cooperate long enough. The tray table was still within reach. The papers were still there. They hadn't taken them with them. That told me everything. They weren't afraid I'd read them. They were afraid I'd understand them too late. I pulled the stack closer, this time without pretending. Every page confirmed it. Not just the transfer. Not just the guardianship language. There were references to asset coordination, temporary control structures, even a line about facilitated property transition. Property transition, my house, my life, reduced to a process. I turned another page, and there it was. A name, not Gideon, not Celeste. A third party, a real estate firm. I read it twice, committing it to memory. So it was already in motion. They hadn't just planned this. They had started it. A cold, precise feeling settled into my chest. Not fear, not anger. Clarity. I placed the papers back exactly as they were, aligning the corners the way Celeste had left them. Details mattered. If anything looked touched, they'd know. And if they knew I was moving early, they would move faster. I couldn't let that happen. I leaned back again, slower this time, controlling every movement, every breath, until I looked exactly the way they expected. Weak. Compliant. Late. But my mind was already ahead of them. I needed a phone. That was the only real problem now. Everything else, the law, the proof, the timing, I could handle once I had that. But inside this room, I had nothing. No bag, no contacts, no way out. Unless a faint sound outside. Footsteps. Not hurried, not hesitant, steady. The door opened again, and this time it was her. Not the earlier nurse. Someone different. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking the monitor, adjusting the drip rate, her hands confident, practiced. Not rushed, not distracted. Present. That mattered. I watched her carefully, saying nothing at first. She noticed. Of course she did. People like her always do. Pain level? She asked, without looking directly at me yet. Manageable, I said. She nodded slightly, making a small note on the chart. Not overly friendly, not cold. Professional, but not blind. That was enough. I waited until she finished adjusting the line, until her attention shifted, just slightly, away from the machines. Then I spoke. Do you ever get the feeling, I said quietly, that something isn't right, even when everyone keeps telling you it is? That made her look at me. Really look this time. Not as a patient, as a person. Just for a second. But a second was all I needed. Because in that second, I saw it. She wasn't part of their plan. She wasn't ignoring the room. She was observing it. And that meant one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. Not completely. Not if I played this exactly right. I didn't rush into it. That was the difference between asking for help and getting it. If I sounded desperate, she might pull back. If I said too much too fast, she might default to protocol. People in hospitals are trained to follow lines, not cross them. So I stayed quiet for a few seconds after she looked at me, letting the question sit between us. She adjusted the IV again, slower this time. You mean medically? She asked. No, I said. I mean, when the story doesn't match the feeling. That made her pause. Not visibly. Not in a way most people would catch. But I saw it. The smallest delay before her hand moved again. Good. You're safe here, she said. Neutral. Careful. I'm not, I replied. That was the first real shift. Her eyes moved to mine again, sharper now. There's a moment when a stranger decides whether you're confused or telling the truth. I held her gaze, didn't blink, didn't overplay it. I need to make a phone call, I said quietly, and I need to do it without my family knowing. Silence. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the chart, flipped a page, checked something that didn't need checking. Buying time. Thinking. Patients aren't restricted from communication, she said finally. If you want your phone, your family should... They took it, I interrupted, still calm. On purpose. That landed harder. I could see it now. The calculation behind her eyes. This wasn't just a request anymore. This was a situation. I'm being moved somewhere I didn't agree to, I continued, keeping my voice low, steady. There are documents, legal ones. They're trying to get me to sign while I'm here. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not dramatic, but real. Do you have cognitive concerns documented? She asked. No. Do you understand where you are? Yes. Date? March 12th. Full name? Marlo Voss. No hesitation, no cracks. She exhaled slowly through her nose. That was the moment. She believed me. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. I'm not allowed to give out personal devices, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to give it to me, I replied. I'm asking you to stay in the room while I use it. Another pause. Longer this time. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. You understand, she said. If I'm wrong about this, you won't be, I said. Not sharply, not emotionally, just certain. That certainty did more than any explanation could have. She slipped her hand into her pocket. For a second, I thought she might pull it out and say no. Instead, she took a breath and placed the phone face down on the edge of the tray. I didn't see anything, she said. I didn't move immediately. That was important, too. No grabbing, no urgency. I reached for it slowly, like everything else I'd done in that room. But the second my fingers touched it, everything inside me shifted. This wasn't just a phone. This was control. This was timing. This was the one thing they thought they had taken from me completely. Thank you, I said. She nodded once, stepping back slightly, positioning herself near the door, not leaving, but giving me space. Watching. I turned the phone over. The screen lit up. No hesitation now. I dialed the first number from memory. It rang once. Twice. Then, Mercer and Hale, this is Marlo Voss, I said. Clear. Sharp. Awake. I need to report an active case of attempted financial control and coercion by immediate family. It's happening right now. Silence on the other end. Then the tone changed instantly. Mrs. Voss, are you safe to speak? Yes. Are you under pressure to sign documents? Yes. Do you have access to those documents? Yes. Do not sign anything, she said firmly. We're initiating immediate review and escalation. Stay exactly where you are. I intend to. I ended the call, but I wasn't done. I opened the keypad again and dialed a second number. This one, I didn't even need to think about. Adult Protective Services, a voice answered. My name is Marlo Voss, I said. I believe I'm being isolated and manipulated for financial control by my son and his wife. I'm currently in a hospital, and I need this documented today. That word mattered. Today. Not tomorrow, not later. Today. When I finished, I placed the phone back exactly where it had been. Face down, calm, controlled. The nurse, Rowan, I noticed now from her badge, watched me for a moment longer. "You just changed something," she said quietly. I looked at her. "No," I replied. "I stopped something." And somewhere down the hall, behind closed doors and quiet conversations, their timeline had just been broken. I didn't feel it right away. That would have been too easy. What I felt first was stillness. The kind that settles after something irreversible has already happened. Rowan took her phone back without a word, slipping it into her pocket like nothing unusual had taken place, but the air in the room had changed. Subtly, quietly. And then the system started moving. Not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely. It began with a different nurse, not Rowan, an older one, composed, measured, with a badge that marked her as charge staff. She stepped into the room with a clipboard that was not mine and eyes that did not belong to someone checking vitals. "Mrs. Voss," she said, calm but direct. "I'd like to ask you a few questions privately." That word mattered. Privately. Gideon and Celeste weren't in the room yet, but it meant something else. Someone had flagged something. "I'd appreciate that," I said. She nodded once and stepped back out into the hallway, waiting, not asking, expecting. Right on time, the door opened again, but this time it was them. Gideon first, then Celeste. Too fast. Too aligned. They had been called back. "Hey," Gideon said, smiling too quickly. "Everything okay?" The charge nurse didn't return the smile. "I need a few minutes alone with Mrs. Voss," she said. Silence, just for a second. Then Celeste stepped forward, gentle but firm. "We'd prefer to stay. She's still disoriented at times." There it was again. That word. Placed. Used. "Mrs. Voss," the nurse said, without looking at them. "Would you like them to remain?" I turned my head slowly, looked at Gideon, then Celeste. And for the first time since I woke up, I didn't soften my expression. "No," I said. One word. Clean. Final. That was all it took. The balance shifted. Gideon's smile dropped. Not completely, but enough. Celeste's posture tightened, her fingers curling slightly around the edge of the clipboard she still held. "This is unnecessary," she said. "We're her family." "And she's my patient," the nurse replied evenly. "I'll come get you when we're done." There was no argument after that. Not because they agreed, because they couldn't. They stepped out. But not calmly. Gideon didn't look at me as he left. Celeste did, and in her eyes, for the first time. There was something new, not control, not calculation, pressure. The door closed. The nurse stepped back in, sat down, not rushed, not casual, focused. "Has anyone pressured you to sign documents?" she asked. "Yes." "Do you understand what those documents are?" "Yes." "Do you feel safe returning home with your current family support?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I understood the weight of it. "No," I said. She nodded once, making a note. No surprise. No doubt. "Just confirmation. We've received a report," she said, "and we're initiating a protective review. That means no discharge decisions will be made without evaluation, and no documents will be processed without oversight." There it was. Their timeline. Stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. "Thank you," I said quietly. She met my eyes. "You did the right thing speaking up," she replied. I didn't answer. Because this wasn't about right or wrong. This was about survival. She stood, gave one last glance at the monitors, and moved toward the door. Someone else will be coming to speak with you, she added. Until then, no one pressures you. If they try, you call us. I nodded. The door opened, closed, and then silence again. But not the same silence. This one had structure, movement behind it, consequences. I leaned back into the pillow, letting my body finally rest for real this time. Not out of weakness, but because the first battle was over, and I had won it. Outside, I could hear their voices. Low, tense, no longer controlled, no longer confident. They didn't know what had happened yet. Not fully. But they knew something had shifted. And for the first time since I woke up in that bed, they were the ones trying to catch up. Now everything turns. Staff is involved, and the control slips from their hands. This is the moment power changes sides. What would you do right here if you were Marlowe? They didn't come in right away. That told me everything. If nothing had changed, they would have walked back into that room like they still owned it, like they had been doing from the start. Calm, smiling, contained. But now, they were waiting. I could hear them just beyond the door. Not clearly, but enough. The rhythm of voices under control, but tight, measured. Like people trying to agree on a version of events before stepping back into the light. Good. That meant they were no longer ahead of me. I adjusted myself slightly in the bed, letting my head tilt back just enough to look tired again. Not weak, just slower. The version of me they had built their plan around. Let them keep believing in it. The door opened. Gideon stepped in first, but he didn't smile this time. That was new. Celeste followed, composed as always, but something about her posture had changed. Less fluid, more deliberate. Like every movement was now being chosen instead of performed. "Everything okay?" Gideon asked. Same words, different tone. I looked at him, steady. "Yes," I said. Nothing more. He waited. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe an explanation. Maybe confusion. Maybe fear. He got none of it. Celeste stepped in, filling the space he left open. "We were told someone spoke with you," she said. Light, casual, almost curious. "Yes." "And?" I held her gaze. "And they asked questions," I replied. Silence. A long one this time. Not empty. Heavy, because now they understood. Not everything, but enough. Gideon ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. Not frustration. Yet. Something closer to recalculating. "Mom," he said, softer now, stepping closer to the bed. "You have to understand. We're trying to help you here." There it was. The pivot. From control to concern. Too late. "I understand exactly what you're trying to do," I said. That stopped him. Completely. Celeste didn't move, didn't blink, but I saw it again. That flicker. Pressure. "You're overwhelmed," Gideon continued, pushing through it. "This whole situation, hospital, stress, confusion." "I am not confused," I said. "Not louder, just clearer, sharper, final." The room changed again. This time, it wasn't subtle, because for the first time, I wasn't playing along. Gideon's jaw tightened, just slightly. His patience, whatever version of it he'd been performing, was thinning. Celeste stepped in before he could lose control. "Marlowe," she said gently, taking a step closer, her voice lowering, like she was speaking to someone fragile. "No one is against you. But decisions have to be made quickly, and we're trying to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that wouldn't expose everything, so she changed direction. "You don't need to handle everything yourself," she said. "That's what we're here for." And that was the line, the one they actually believed. Not that I was weak, but that I was no longer necessary. I looked at both of them. Really looked. Not as my family, as people standing in front of something they thought they already owned. "You've already started, haven't you?" I said quietly. Gideon's eyes flickered. Celeste stayed still. "The house," I continued, "the paperwork, the timing. No denial, no correction, just silence. Confirmation without words." I nodded once. Slow, measured. "Then let me make this simple for you," I said. Now they were listening. Really listening. Because something in my voice had shifted. Completely. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Gideon took a step forward. "Mom?" "No," I said. And this time, there was no softness left in it. Just steel. "You don't get to decide what happens to me," I continued. "Not while I'm still here, not while I'm still thinking, not while I'm still capable of saying no." The word hung in the air. No. Simple. Absolute. Celeste's expression finally cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. Her lips pressed tighter, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She wasn't used to resistance. Not like this. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm making it visible." That landed. Harder than anything else I'd said, because that was the one thing they couldn't afford. Visibility. Gideon stepped back this time, not forward. That told me everything. They weren't in control anymore. Not of me, not of the situation, and for the first time since this started. They knew it. They didn't argue after that. That was the strange part. No raised voices. No sudden explosion. No desperate attempt to pull me back into whatever version of control they had left. Instead, Gideon just nodded once, tight and distant, like he was sealing something off inside himself. "All right," he said, "if that's how you want to do this. Not if you feel that way. Not we'll talk later." Final language. Celeste didn't say anything at all. She simply gathered the papers from the tray with slow, precise movements, aligning them again as if order could still be restored through neat edges and straight lines. But her silence wasn't calm. It was calculating. "We'll give you some time," she said finally, her voice smooth again, but thinner now. "You've clearly made up your mind for today." For today. I noticed that. They still believed time was on their side. They turned and left together. This time, they didn't linger outside the door. No whispered discussion. No attempt to reset the scene. They walked away. That was new. And that was dangerous. Because when people like that stop pushing, it means they're changing strategy. I stayed still for a few seconds after the door closed, listening, counting the silence, measuring the absence. Then I exhaled slowly and turned my head toward the hallway again. Footsteps. Different ones this time. Lighter. Uneven. Hesitant. The door opened just a crack, like whoever was behind it wasn't sure they were allowed to come in. And then I saw her. Ivy. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. She'd grown, of course. But something in her posture had changed. Shoulders slightly drawn in, eyes scanning the room like she expected to be told she didn't belong there. Hi, she said quietly. "Ivy," I said, and for the first time since all of this started, something in my chest softened. She stepped in, closing the door gently behind her, like even the sound might get her in trouble. "I didn't know if I should come," she admitted. "Mom said you needed rest." Of course she did. I studied her face carefully. No calculation, no performance, just confusion and something else. Worry. I'm glad you did, I said. She moved closer to the bed, slowly, like she was approaching something fragile. Not me, but the situation itself. They're acting weird, she said under her breath, glancing toward the door. Like, really weird. I almost smiled. Yes, I said. They are. She hesitated, then leaned in a little more. Grandma, what's going on? That question mattered. Not because of the words, because of how she asked it. She wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for the truth. I could have protected her, given her something softer, something easier to carry. But that would have made her just another piece in their version of events. And I wasn't going to let that happen. They're trying to take control of things that don't belong to them, I said quietly. Her brow furrowed. Like what? My decisions, I replied. My home, my life. She went very still. That landed. Is that even allowed? She asked. No, I said. Not if I say no. She nodded slowly, processing it. Then, after a second, I think they've already started, she said. That made me look at her more closely. What do you mean? She hesitated, glancing toward the door again before lowering her voice even further. I went to the house yesterday, she said. Mom sent me to pick up some of your things. Of course she did. What things? I asked. I don't know. She just said essentials, but Ivy swallowed slightly. There were people there. My stomach tightened. What kind of people? Not movers, she said quickly. Like staging people. They were moving things around, talking about lighting. One of them had a camera. There it was. Not a plan. Execution. They told me not to touch anything, she added. Like it wasn't even my house. My house. Already being prepared. Already being turned into something to sell. How long were they there? I asked. I don't know. When I left, they were still setting up. Mom was in the kitchen with some guy talking about timelines. Timelines. That word again. Always moving. Always ahead. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. The pieces were no longer theoretical. They were active. Moving. And if I hadn't made that call when I did, by the time I got out of this hospital, my life would have already been processed into something unrecognizable. Grandma? Ivy said softly. I looked at her. You did the right thing coming here, I said. She nodded, but she still looked unsure. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, I said. But you're in the middle of something they didn't expect you to see. That made her straighten slightly. Not scared. Aware. Then what do I do? She asked. I held her gaze. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving this situation. I was building something inside it. You stay exactly the way you are, I said, and you don't let them tell you what you saw wasn't real. She nodded, and just like that, they had lost something they didn't even realize they needed. Control of the narrative. After Ivy left, the room didn't feel empty. It felt informed. That was the difference. Before, I had suspicions, patterns, fragments that didn't align. Now I had confirmation, real, physical movement happening outside of me, people in my house, my things being touched, rearranged, prepared. I closed my eyes for a moment, but not to rest, to organize. Staging crew, photographer, timeline, legal papers already drafted, a facility ready immediately. This wasn't rushed, it was pre-built, and I had walked into the middle of it. The door opened again about 20 minutes later. Not Gideon, not Celeste. A man this time. Mid-50s, maybe older, with a posture that carried authority without needing to announce it. Not hospital staff, not family. "Mrs. Voss?" he said. "Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm with Adult Protective Services." Right on time. I gestured slightly toward the chair. "Please." He sat down, placing a thin folder on his lap, not opening it yet. Observing first. Taking in the room, the equipment, the distance between the bed and the door. Not rushing. Good. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to confirm. Are you comfortable speaking right now?" "Yes." "Are you under any immediate pressure to sign documents?" "No. Not at this moment." He nodded once. "Then I'd like you to walk me through everything from when you woke up." So I did. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Precisely. I told him about the phone, the wording they used, the documents, the facility, the shift in their behavior when I refused, the real estate reference, the staging team Ivy had seen, the timing. I didn't skip anything, didn't embellish, didn't soften. When I finished, he didn't speak right away. He made a few notes, closed the folder halfway, then looked at me directly. "Have you given them any form of legal authority?" he asked. "No." "Power of attorney? Temporary or otherwise?" "No." "Have you signed anything since being admitted?" "No." He nodded again. "That's important." "I assumed it would be," I said. He allowed himself a small, almost invisible smile. "Yes," he said. "It is." He opened the folder this time, flipping to a page I couldn't see fully, but I caught enough. Printed sections, legal formatting, not hospital paperwork. This was already moving beyond internal review. "Based on what you've reported," he continued, "we're placing a temporary hold on any external transfers tied to your name that we can identify quickly. Property activity, financial movements, and third-party authorizations." There it was. Not suspicion. Action. "They've already started," I said. "I believe you," he replied. Simple, direct, no hesitation. That mattered more than anything. "What happens next?" I asked. "We verify," he said. "We cross-reference the documents they've presented. We speak to hospital staff. We review any attempts at access tied to your accounts, and—" He paused slightly. "We speak to your family." I nodded. Good luck with that. That earned a slight shift in his expression. Not amusement, recognition. "I've had more difficult conversations," he said. I believed him. But this one wouldn't be simple, because Gideon and Celeste weren't careless. They were structured, prepared, and now they were under pressure, which made them unpredictable. "Will they know I reported this?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Not immediately in full detail, but they will be aware that a review has been initiated." Good. Let them feel it. Let them try to adjust. They were already too late. He closed the folder completely this time and stood. "One more question," he said. "Do you feel safe if they return to this room?" I considered that carefully. "Yes," I said, "but they won't be comfortable." "That's not the same thing," he replied. "No," I said. "It isn't." He nodded once. "I'll be just outside for a while," he added. "If anything changes, you ask for me directly." "I will." He moved toward the door, then paused for just a second. "You acted quickly," he said. "That made a difference." "I didn't act quickly," I replied. "I acted on time." He held my gaze for a moment, then stepped out. The door closed, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ahead. They didn't wait long this time, which meant they knew. Not everything, but enough to understand that something had moved beyond their control. The door opened without a knock. Gideon walked in first again, but now there was no attempt to soften anything. No careful tone, no rehearsed calm. Just a tight, contained energy that barely held itself together. Celeste followed, slower, more measured, but her eyes were sharper than I had ever seen them. "You reported us," Gideon said. Not a question, a statement. I didn't answer immediately. I watched him. Let the silence stretch just long enough to make it clear I wasn't reacting on his timeline anymore. "Yes," I said. That was all. The word hit harder than anything else I could have said, because it was clean. No defense, no explanation, just truth. Gideon exhaled sharply, turning away for a second, running his hand through his hair. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "After everything we've done." "Don't," I said. He stopped, not because I raised my voice, because I didn't. "Don't rewrite this into something it isn't," I continued. "Not here, not with me." Celeste stepped forward then, placing herself slightly between us, not to protect me, but to regain control of the space. "Marlowe," she said, calm again, but now it was the kind of calm that comes with pressure underneath it. "You've escalated this unnecessarily." "No," I replied. "You escalated it when you started acting without me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "We were acting for you. You were acting around me." That landed. Hard. Gideon turned back, frustration no longer hidden. "You don't even understand what you've just done," he said. "You've complicated everything." "I was supposed to make it easier?" I asked. "Yes," he snapped. "That's the whole point. You let us handle it. Things go smoothly. Now," he gestured vaguely, "now this turns into something messy." Messy. That word told me more than anything else. Not wrong, not illegal. Messy. Because what they were afraid of wasn't consequences. It was exposure. I leaned back slightly, studying him. "You're not worried about me," I said. He didn't answer. "You're worried about losing control of the process." Silence. Again. Confirmation. Celeste exhaled slowly, adjusting her tone once more, shifting tactics mid-conversation like she always did. "Let's be practical," she said. "This review won't last forever. These things get resolved quickly when there's no real issue." "No real issue," I repeated. She nodded. "Exactly. So instead of turning this into something bigger than it needs to be, we can still move forward. You just need to cooperate." There it was, the last version of the same plan. Different language. Same outcome. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. This time it didn't feel like resistance. It felt like closure. Gideon let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think this stops anything?" he said. "You think one report changes the situation?" "Yes," I said. Not loudly, not emotionally, just certain. "It already has." That was the moment it shifted again. Because they saw it, not in the room, not in me, but in everything around us. The fact that no one had come in to push papers again. The fact that they had been asked to step out earlier. The fact that the system had started watching. They weren't operating freely anymore. They were being observed. And they hated it. Celeste's composure cracked just slightly. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." That ended it. Not dramatically, not explosively, just completely. Gideon didn't argue again. He didn't push forward. He didn't even try to convince me. He just looked at me differently. Like something had shifted in his understanding of what I was. Not weak, not confused, not manageable, just in the way. He turned toward the door. Celeste followed, but before she stepped out, She looked back at me one last time, and in her eyes now, there was no calculation left, just frustration. Because for the first time since they started this, they had nothing left to control. The door closed, and the silence that followed wasn't uncertain anymore. It was settled. They had made their move. I had made mine. And now, everything that came next would be out in the open. They didn't come back. Not that day. And that told me more than anything they could have said. Because Gideon never walked away from something unfinished. Not when he believed he still had leverage. Not when there was something left to gain. But now, there was nothing left for them in that room. Only risk. Only exposure. Only questions they couldn't control. The shift didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a curtain being pulled back inch by inch. First, a different doctor came in, not the one from earlier, older, more direct. He asked me the same questions, but in a different way. Orientation, memory, awareness, comprehension. I answered all of them without hesitation. He didn't smile, but when he finished, he nodded once. Not to me, to himself. That mattered. Then Rowan came back, quieter than before, checking things that didn't really need checking. But her presence wasn't about medicine anymore. It was about visibility. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. She studied my face for a moment longer than necessary, then gave a small nod. "They've been asking questions," she added under her breath. "Of course they have," I replied. That was expected. What mattered was that they weren't getting the answers they wanted. An hour later, the real shift arrived. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. The door opened, and this time it wasn't just one person. Daniel Reeves stepped in first. Behind him, another woman. Sharp suit, controlled posture, legal. Daphne Mercer, right on time. "Marlowe," she said, stepping forward with calm certainty, placing a leather folio on the side table. "I'm here." I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief. Stability. "You took your time," I said lightly. "Traffic," she replied, "and paperwork. Both unavoidable." Daniel remained near the door, observing, not intervening. Daphne opened the folio, pulling out a set of documents. Clean, organized, deliberate. "Let's make a few things very clear," she said, her voice steady, carrying just enough weight to fill the room without raising itself. "No authority has been legally transferred. No guardianship has been established. No property can be listed, transferred, or altered without your direct, verified consent." I nodded. "I assumed as much," I said. "Yes," she replied. "But assumptions don't stop people. Paper does." "Exactly." She slid one page slightly closer to me, not for signing, just for reference. "Your accounts are now flagged for review," she continued. "Any attempt at access, modification, or authorization tied to your name triggers verification. That includes real estate activity." There it was. The line had been drawn. Not verbally, structurally. Daniel stepped forward slightly. "We've already contacted the agency connected to the listing activity at your residence," he added. "They were very interested to learn that you had not personally authorized anything." I almost smiled. Very interested. That was one way to put it. "And my family?" I asked. Daphne closed the folio slowly. "They've been informed that any further attempts to act on your behalf without legal standing will be documented as coercive interference," she said. Calm, precise, devastating. Silence settled in the room again, but this time, it wasn't uncertain. It was resolved. They won't stop, I said. No, Daphne agreed. But they won't move the same way again. That was enough, because I didn't need them to disappear. I just needed them to lose control. And they had. Completely. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Soft. Careful. Daniel stepped aside as it opened. Gideon? Celeste. They didn't step fully inside this time. They stayed near the threshold. That told me everything. Daphne didn't turn toward them immediately. She let them stand there. Wait. Then slowly, she closed the folio and looked up. Mr. and Mrs. Voss, she said, her tone polite but not welcoming. I believe we'll be speaking shortly. Gideon didn't respond. Celeste's expression didn't change, but neither of them moved forward. Because for the first time, they weren't walking into a situation they controlled. They were stepping into one that was already defined, and they knew it. I looked at them both. Calm. Still. Untouchable. And in that moment, the entire thing became clear. They hadn't lost because I fought them. They lost because I spoke first. This is the moment everything collapses for them. Lawyers, staff, witnesses. No more control, no more silence. And tell me honestly, would you have gone this far or stopped earlier? They didn't argue in the doorway. That would have been the old version of them, the one that still believed they could push through resistance with pressure, tone, or control. Now they stood still. Gideon's hand rested on the doorframe, not gripping it, but not relaxed either. Celeste stood just behind him, her posture straight, her face composed again. But it wasn't the same composure as before. This one had limits. Daphne didn't invite them in. She didn't need to. Let's not do this here, she said calmly, already standing. We'll use the consultation room down the hall. Not a suggestion, a direction. Daniel stepped aside, making space, not for them, but for the process. Gideon hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. That was new. Celeste followed without a word. The door closed behind them. And just like that, they were no longer dealing with me. They were dealing with structure. I leaned back into the pillow, letting out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Not relief, again, not that, but a kind of release from tension that had been sitting under everything since the moment I woke up. Rowan stepped in a few minutes later, quieter than usual. They're in the consultation room, she said. I assumed. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. It doesn't look comfortable. I almost smiled. It's not supposed to be. She nodded once, then adjusted the blanket near my arm, more out of habit than necessity. You did something most people don't, she said. What's that? You didn't wait. That word again. Timing. Everything had come down to that. I've had enough years to know when something is off, I replied. She gave a small, understanding look, then left. The room settled again, but now it felt different in a way I hadn't experienced yet. Secure. Not because nothing could happen, but because whatever did happen would now be seen. Measured. Recorded. Time passed. Not long, but long enough. And then the door opened again. Daphne returned first. Alone. That told me everything. She didn't sit right away. She placed her folio back on the table, slower this time, more deliberate. Well, she said, exhaling lightly. That was predictable. I watched her carefully. How bad? I asked. They're not admitting intent, she said. Of course. But they're also not denying actions. That was worse, because denial could be challenged. Silence had weight. They attempted to frame everything as preventive care planning, she continued. Temporary support. Safety measures. Of course they did. Yes, she said. The problem is, they moved too far ahead of consent. There it was again. Timing. Always timing. Did they say anything about the house? I asked. Daphne's expression shifted slightly. Yes, she said, and that's where it becomes less defensible. I didn't interrupt. They've already engaged a listing agent, she continued. Preliminary photography was scheduled, no signed authorization. No legal standing. I closed my eyes for just a second. Not from shock, from confirmation. It's frozen, she added. Completely. Any attempt to proceed now will trigger direct legal response. Good. Financials? I asked. Flagged? She said. There was an inquiry attempt tied to one of your accounts earlier today. It didn't go through. So they had already tried. Even now. Even after everything. That told me something important. They hadn't stopped because they understood. They stopped because they were blocked. And now? I asked. Daphne finally sat down. Now, she said, they adjust, or they escalate. I nodded slowly. They won't adjust, I said. No, she agreed. I don't believe they will. Silence settled between us for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just clear. You'll be discharged under your own authority, she continued, with documented capacity, no transfer, no facility. We'll arrange in-home care on your terms. My terms. That phrase landed deeper than anything else. And them? I asked. Daphne looked at me directly. That depends on you. I held her gaze, not immediately answering, because this wasn't about reaction anymore. This was about decision. And decisions, real ones, don't come from emotion. They come from clarity. I'm not interested in revenge, I said finally. I didn't think you were, she replied. I'm interested in boundaries. That earned the smallest shift in her expression. Approval. Then we'll build them properly, she said. Not emotionally, structurally. Exactly the way this needed to be handled. There was a quiet knock at the door. Daniel stepped back in, just enough to be seen. They've left, he said. Of course they had. Not because they were done. Because they had nothing left to do here. I nodded once. Good, I said. And for the first time since this began, the room belonged to me again. Going home felt different than I expected. Not lighter, not emotional, precise. Everything was arranged through Daphne before I even left the hospital. Not rushed, but controlled. A licensed in-home nurse scheduled for the first week. A temporary lock service already confirmed. Account alerts active. Documentation filed. No gaps. No space for interference. When I stepped out of the car in front of my house, the air felt sharper than I remembered. Crisp. Clean. Real. Not filtered through hospital walls or quiet conversations behind doors. But the house wasn't the same. Not because it had changed completely. Because it had been touched. That's the only word for it. Touched. The front door opened smoothly, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Subtle shifts. Small adjustments. Things that would have gone unnoticed to anyone else. But not to me. The hallway table, slightly angled. The brass key dish moved 2 inches to the left. The faint scent of something unfamiliar in the air, like citrus polish layered over something older. They had been here. Not visiting, preparing. I walked in slowly, taking everything in without reacting. My nurse, Elena, quiet and observant, followed a step behind, saying nothing, which I appreciated. The living room was worse, not chaotic. Organized. Too organized. My books had been straightened into uniform lines. The throw on the sofa folded with a kind of symmetry I had never cared for. Even the blue porcelain spaniel on the mantel, slightly turned, facing inward instead of toward the window. That was deliberate. Someone had staged this space, not for living, for selling. I stepped further in, my hand brushing lightly against the edge of the sideboard where I used to keep a small lacquered box. It was still there, but when I opened it, empty. Not everything, just enough. A pair of cufflinks, gone. A small silver chain I hadn't worn in years, gone. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just selective. I closed the box slowly. "Elena," I said without turning, "did anyone come in after we confirmed the locks?" "No," she replied. "The locksmith was the first since we arrived?" Good. That meant everything I was seeing had already happened before I got back. I walked into the kitchen, and there it was, the final piece, a folder, left on the counter, neatly placed, too neatly. I approached it slowly, already knowing what I would find before I even opened it. Inside, printed listing drafts, photos, my house, but not as I knew it. Angles adjusted, light enhanced. My personal space turned into something neutral, sellable, stripped of anything that made it mine. Even the dining table had been staged differently. A bowl I didn't own, plates I never used. Someone had been here long enough to reshape the story of this house and leave it behind for me to see. Not by accident, as a message. I closed the folder and stood there for a moment. Not angry, not shaken, just certain. "They thought they were ahead," I said quietly. Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. I turned and walked back into the living room, my eyes scanning everything one more time, but differently now. Not as someone returning home, as someone reclaiming territory. "Call the locksmith back," I said. "We're changing the interior locks, too. Every door." "Of course," she replied. "And tomorrow," I added, "we inventory everything, not just valuables. Everything." She nodded. I walked over to the mantel and adjusted the porcelain spaniel back to where it had always faced. Toward the window, toward the light. A small thing. But it mattered. Because this wasn't about what they had taken. It was about what they had tried to rewrite. And that wasn't going to stay. I picked up the folder again, holding it for just a second before setting it aside. Evidence. Not memory. Then I sat down. In my chair. Exactly where it had always been. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't recovering anything. I was reestablishing it. They didn't wait long. Of course they didn't. People like Gideon and Celeste don't retreat quietly. They regroup. They look for openings, angles, ways to re-enter the situation under a different shape. The next morning, just after Elena finished preparing tea, loose-leaf Darjeeling, the good kind I save for when I need clarity, the doorbell rang. Not tentative, not aggressive. Measured. I didn't move right away. "Elena," I said calmly, "don't open it yet." She paused, setting the cup down gently. "Do you want me to check the camera?" "Yes." A few seconds passed. "It's them," she said. Of course it was. I picked up my cup, took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle before I stood. "Open the door," I said. No hesitation, no avoidance. This wasn't something to hide from. The door opened. Gideon stood there, hands in his coat pockets. Celeste beside him, composed, as always, but thinner now, like whatever she was holding together was starting to strain. Neither of them stepped inside. That told me everything. Can we talk? Gideon asked. Not Mom, not please, just controlled. We are talking, I replied, standing just inside the threshold. He glanced past me, briefly, taking in the hallway, the positioning, the space. Measuring again, always measuring. This doesn't need to go further, he said. We can resolve it. I almost smiled. Resolve. As if this had been a misunderstanding. As far as I'm concerned, I said, it already has gone further. Celeste stepped in slightly, just enough to shift the dynamic. We're not here to argue, she said. We're here to fix this before it becomes something permanent. Permanent. That word mattered. Because now they understood. This wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't something that would reset once I calmed down. This was structure. I've already fixed it, I said. Gideon's jaw tightened. By freezing everything? By bringing in lawyers? By making us look like— I didn't make you look like anything, I interrupted. Silence. Sharp. Clean. I revealed what you were already doing, I continued. That landed. He took a step forward. Just one. Elena, I said without turning. Close the door. Gideon stopped immediately. That was new. He didn't push past it, didn't challenge it, because now there were lines. Real ones. Elena stepped forward and gently closed the door halfway, leaving just enough space for the conversation to continue, but not enough for them to step in uninvited. Control. Visible. Enforced. Celeste adjusted her tone again. You're overcorrecting, she said. What we did? Yes. Maybe we moved too quickly. But the intention was never to harm you. Intent. That was what she had left. I looked at her carefully, then shook my head once. You don't stage a house you don't plan to sell, I said. She didn't answer. You don't prepare legal documents you don't plan to use, I added. Still nothing. And you don't take someone's phone unless you're afraid of what they might say. That was the one. I saw it in her face. Not guilt, not regret. Exposure. Gideon exhaled sharply. We were trying to manage a situation, he said. You had an episode. I had a moment, I corrected. You built a plan. He went quiet. Because there was no version of this where he could argue that point without unraveling everything else. Celeste tried one last angle. If you continue this, she said carefully, there will be consequences. Legal ones, family ones. This doesn't just stop with paperwork. There it was. The closest thing to a threat they could still make. Not loud, but clear. I stepped forward slightly, just enough to close the remaining distance between us. Then let it continue, I said. No hesitation, no emotion, just finality. Because this wasn't about fear anymore. It was about terms. And I had already set them. Gideon looked at me for a long moment. Longer than before. Like he was trying to find something familiar. Something he could still work with. He didn't find it. Because it wasn't there anymore. He nodded once. Not agreement. Acceptance. All right, he said quietly. Celeste didn't speak again. They turned, walked away. No last words. No attempt to reclaim anything. Because now they understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't a situation they could recover. It was one they had lost. I stood there until they reached the end of the path. Until the car door closed. Until the engine started. And only then did I step back and close the door completely. Not gently. Not forcefully. Precisely. And just like that. There was nothing left between us that wasn't intentional. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. Days passed, not dramatically, not with sudden turns, but with steady, deliberate movement. The kind that doesn't draw attention but changes everything underneath. The inventory was completed first, room by room, drawer by drawer. Not just valuables, everything. Elena documented it all while I walked beside her, naming what belonged, what didn't, and what had been shifted. The missing pieces were noted, the staged elements removed. The house slowly returned, not to what it was before, but to something cleaner, defined, nothing ambiguous, nothing left open for interpretation. The locks were replaced. Every entry point, every interior door, every access that had once been shared without question, reset. Not out of fear, out of structure. Daphne moved just as precisely on her side. Documents rewritten, permissions revoked, access lists reduced to exactly what was necessary, and nothing more. No gray areas, no assumptions, only clarity. Gideon and Celeste didn't come back. They didn't call, didn't send messages, but they didn't disappear either. I heard things, not directly. But enough. Conversations shifting, explanations being made, versions of events trying to reshape themselves in other people's minds. She misunderstood. They were just trying to help. It got blown out of proportion. Of course, that's how it always goes. But here's the difference. None of it mattered anymore, because the only place where their version had power was the place they had already lost. My house. My decisions. My name. One afternoon, Ivy came by again, not hesitant this time. She knocked, waited, and stepped in like she belonged, which she did. She stood in the living room for a moment, looking around. "It feels different," she said. "It is," I replied. She walked over to the mantel, noticing the porcelain spaniel. "You turned it back," she said. "Yes." She smiled slightly. "I'm glad." We sat together after that, quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. "Are you okay?" she asked eventually. I considered that. Not the easy version, the real one. "Yes," I said, "but not in the way I was before." She nodded, like she understood more than she said. "Are you going to forgive them?" she asked. I looked at her. "No," I said. "Not harsh, not emotional, just true. But I'm also not going to carry them," I added. That seemed to make sense to her. She leaned back slightly, exhaling. "I didn't like how they were acting," she said. "It didn't feel right." "You noticed," I said. "Yeah." "That matters." Because it did. More than anything else in this entire situation. Not what they did. Not what I stopped. But who saw it clearly. Time moved on. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But forward. And one morning, sitting in that same chair, with the light coming through the same window, I realized something simple. They had tried to take my voice by removing access, by controlling communication, by isolating me just enough to act before I could respond. And it almost worked. Not because I was weak, because they were early. But in the... All right, my dears. This one is complicated. She didn't forgive, but she didn't destroy either. She chose structure over emotion. Personally, I might have cut them off even harder. But what about you? Would you have gone further, or stopped right here? If this story held you until the end, leave a like, write your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.